Chapter 1, Biology Exploring Life. So, as an introduction to Chapter 1, and in order to save time in class, since we are kind of rushed to and limited to 1 day a week, I want you to listen to the following presentation and read pages 1 through 3 for class for this upcoming Saturday, January 24th. So the first thing we're going to talk about is how all forms of life share common properties. Biology is the scientific study of life, and properties of life include order. So the highly ordered structure that typifies life. And we can see with the sunflower, the order that is taking place with the seeds on the interior of the flower, and then of course the petals themselves. Everything's nice and organized. The second characteristic of a living organism is its ability to reproduce. So all living organisms need to be able to reproduce their own kind. The third characteristic of life is growth and development. So we have consistent growth and development, which is controlled by inherited DNA. So we can see this little alligator coming out of the egg, and we know it will grow over time to be a big alligator and develop into a mature alligator, which then will be able to successfully complete the second characteristic of life, which is to be able to reproduce. So living organisms need to be able to process energy. So the use of chemical energy to power an organism's activities and chemical reactions. So in this picture, I am showing a bear eating the fish. The energy that is in the fish will then be used by the bear to keep that particular organism alive and have its cells doing the jobs that they need to do in order to keep that bear alive. So living organisms also need to be able to respond to their environment. So in this particular example, I have a Venus flytrap that is responding to the signals that dragonfly sent to the plant for it to close those modified leaves up to entrap the dragonfly so that it can then metabolize or obtain energy from that dragonfly. And another characteristic of life is to be able to regulate. I prefer the word homeostasis, but this textbook's using regulation. So regulation is an ability to control an organism's internal environment within limits that sustain life. You'll notice that in this particular chapter, Campbell really likes his lemurs. So we have our picture here of a lemur that is cooling himself off. Now, the seventh characteristic of life is evolutionary adaptation. So adaptations evolve over many generations as individuals with traits best suited to their environments have greater reproductive success and pass their traits to offspring. So with this particular example, you can see I have an insect here that looks a lot like a leaf. So of course, if it's camouflaged in that it blends in with the leaf, it will not be eaten by predators. It will live long enough then to produce offspring, and that particular individual's traits will be passed on to their offspring, and they will also resemble the leaf. Those that do not have those sets of genes, or should I say alleles, and we'll talk about this later in the semester, that do not resemble the leaf as much may get picked off by predators and therefore will not pass those copies, those forms of genes on to their offspring. So again, the ability to evolve or to have different adaptations which will then allow that individual to be successful is a mechanism for evolution. So this particular slide is a summary of the characteristics of living organisms. So if we go through those, we have number 1, which is order, 2, reproduction, 3, growth and development, 4, energy processing, 5, response to the environment, 6, regulation, and 7, evolutionary adaptation. Obviously, this slide did not, what's the word I'm looking for? It did not transfer well into this program, so you can see the spellings kind of a little messed up. In the second part of this chapter, we're going to talk about life's hierarchy of organization. So we're basically going to see how we organize life from big to small. We're going to start here as big, and the biggest category here is the biosphere, and that's all the environments on Earth that support life. If we take that biosphere down into smaller units, we have ecosystems, and this is where all the organisms living in a particular area and the physical components with which the organisms interact. And the words that kind of describe that, biotic, are the living organisms in that environment, and the abiotic is the non-living. So we're going to see how those two interact with each other in an ecosystem. So if we go down smaller from an ecosystem, we have a community. Now the community is the entire array of organisms living in a particular ecosystem. So this is more than one species. So if we look in our picture here, we've got like this yucca tree here, and again our lemurs interacting with each other, and there's another tree in the background. Now population would be a group of individuals of the same species. So here we can see we have a population of lemurs, so a group of lemurs that are in this picture. Now once we get smaller than a population, we're going to end up with our organism, which is an individual living thing. So just a little review from large to small. We started off with our biosphere, which is the whole area on our planet that will support life. And then when we break down the biosphere into smaller units, we have our ecosystem, which right here is a forest in Madagascar. And then we have a community, which again is all the plants interacting with the animals. And then we went to a population, which is the group of lemurs here. And then we went to an organism, just one lemur. So now that we're down to the level of an individual, let's go down even smaller. So we can get down to organ systems, which are several organs that cooperate in a specific function. And then we can break that down into just an organ, which is a structure that's composed of tissues that provide a specific function for that organism. And then we can take the tissue and break that down into a group of similar cells that perform a specific function until we finally get to the smallest unit, the basic unit of life, which is called a cell. But we can break down a cell into even smaller units. We have what are called organelles, which represent little organs. So little organelles inside the cell, they're generally membrane-bound structures that perform a specific function inside the cell. And then we can take those organelles and we can break those down into molecules. So molecules are a cluster of small chemical units called atoms that are held together by chemical bonds. So when we look at our molecule, we have many atoms that are being held by these chemical bonds to make up a molecule. So in this particular picture, we're going to go from our organism, and we can see we really have some formatting issues on this slide, but I think I can talk my way through this. So we have our organism, which then we're going to talk about an organ system, which in this particular case, it's the nervous system. And we can see with the nervous system, that includes the brain, the spinal cords, and then the nerves that are going to tell the muscles to move. And then we can break that down into just the tissue. So we have our organ system. Then I just talked about some organs, brain and spinal cord. And then we can break it down into the tissue, which is a nerve cell. And we can see this nerve cell right here. And then we can break that nerve cell down into organelles. So we have organelles that are inside here. You can see the nucleus. And then we can take that nucleus and break it down even further into a molecule, which is made up of atoms. So to review from the largest to the smallest, let's do this again. We have our biosphere. Biosphere is made up of many different ecosystems. In all of those ecosystems, we have what are called communities. All right. The communities, again, were the plants and the animals interacting with one another. And then we had a population. So we had our population of lemurs. We then went from our population to an organism. We then went from our organism to an organ system, to an organ, to a tissue, to a cell, and then we broke down the cell into organelles, and those organelles will then break down into a molecule, which is made up of atoms. So that's from large to small. You will need to know the hierarchy of life and to be able to put these things in order for your test. And that ends the first presentation of Chapter 1. Make sure you've gone through this because I am going to do a little exercise in class to see if you guys can put these in order and recite and at least identify the different characteristics of life.